Welcome to After Party, everyone. We like to say, at least over the last couple of weeks, it's the show for people who like their news a little bit later and a little bit lighter, but there's a presidential address that promises to be anything but light happening in moments, literally set to begin at 9 p.m. as we go to air this evening. Our guest is Billy Hallowell. He will be with us as well. There's a lot to get through. There was a successful Artemis II launch just hours ago. They're on a 10-day trip to circle the moon. And Billy has an interesting documentary out that touches on some of the big picture conversation about how people of faith are reacting to some of these big developments in the world of space, of scientific discovery in space, and the like. So there's much to discuss with him. Before I go much further, I'm so bad at this, but I wrote down a note for myself. Please do support our journalism by subscribing. It helps a ton to subscribe on YouTube, totally free, doesn't cost you anything, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts as well. That's also very helpful. Remember to like, comment, and review to boost us in the algorithm as well, so that others see the content too. Man, we're going to keep things loose because we don't know how long the president's going to speak for. We don't know when he's going to begin speaking. We know that he was set to speak at 9 p.m. So we're about a minute in to the time period. Not too late so far at all. So we'll keep things a bit relaxed as we try to make sure that we have full coverage, live coverage of what we're expecting to be certainly, quote, updates about the Iran war. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and put the White House live stream up on the screen, and I'll be, as best I can, doing some commentary. This is, again, it is promised to be a speech about updates in the Iran war. Trump previewed earlier today that it would touch on NATO. We'll see. We'll see if that's the bulk of the speech, if that's just a glancing mention in the speech. Nobody totally knows what to expect. But here's the President of the United States walking to the podium down on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It looks like the White House feed actually froze briefly. We might have to pull up one of the news outlets' feeds, but certainly about to start in just a minute whenever you see the president going to the podium. So we're going to put up, here we have the Associated Press speech.
Targeting the world's number one state sponsor of terror, Iran. In these past 4 weeks, our armed forces have delivered swift, decisive, overwhelming.
I'm going to refresh the page. Looks like the feeds are having a little trouble.
Their command and control of the Islamic.
Live coverage, folks. Going to go to a Twitter feed. Sometimes those are better. Let's see. Let's pull up this one.
Most of them.
There we go.
Terrorist. Their command and control of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is being decimated as we speak. Their ability to
All right, we're gonna work on getting a different feed. Some glitches happening all over this evening, but you saw right there off the top, Trump doing. We were expecting him to say updates on Epic Fury, and that's certainly what it sounds like already. So I have the feed working just fine. It's when we are pulling it up that it's becoming a little bit more of a problem. Let me go ahead and see what we can do here. Bear with me just one more moment.
all over the world. After rebuilding our military during my first term, we have
No, it's just not working for some reason. Hard to say
Far the
exactly what's
strongest
going on the
military
tech side.
anywhere in the world.
It works until
And
you
now
start streaming it, but it's then keeps pausing, automatically keeps pausing. So we'll see if we can make something happen on the tech side in just a moment. But otherwise, as we mentioned, so far, pretty much what you'd expected, a kind of recap of Epic Fury. And we had some indication earlier in the day that he might touch on NATO. Obviously, NATO allies declining so far to get involved in the conflict, and actually, if you're like Spain, actively declining to get involved in the conflict, and actually actively thwarting, telling the United States that they're not using your airspace, and that's aggravated Trump enormously. He's saying right now that he's vowed for a long time he would never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. So taking some ownership to questions of whether it's a flip-flop, mentioning right now that Israel's proxies were behind Iran's proxies were behind the Barrack bombings years ago. So he's addressing so far head on the criticisms right off the bat, some of the big arguments that have been leveled against him. So far, nothing super surprising, but we're waiting for a big announcement potentially from Trump, because when he does major speeches like this, you can only do so many of them. He said tonight, or he said earlier today in the White House, I'm making a little speech at 9:00, and basically I'm going to tell everybody how great I am. So far, yes, that's about what's happening at the 9 p.m. speech. So that's what we got going on so far this evening. Let's see if
this situation has been going on for 47 years and should have been handled long before I arrived in office.
Live TV, it's fun, isn't it? It's a blast. But again, so far in the speech, nothing major announced yet. He's building up to it. He's addressing really the major points of criticism head on, saying that he has always talked about this, which is true. And it's actually an interesting point. We've talked about it on the show. I mean, my own perspective on this is that when you tell people you're not starting new wars, they tend to take that as like a big picture position, and they see that as it's in some sense, if you're also saying you're a hawk on Iran, and that you're going to do whatever it takes to keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, you assassinate Soleimani and the like. I think what people take that as is you're going to do everything to avoid starting a new war. And I think the argument that you're seeing him make here is that he had exhausted all other options diplomatically. And there are competing reports about exactly what was happening diplomatically behind the scenes when we're back in February 28th or February 27th. Like, where were the negotiations on February 27th? There are some competing reports about exactly what was happening. People disagree about how serious Iran was about getting rid of nuclear weapons, totally stopping its attempts to enrich uranium to the capacity that they would need for something like that. And we don't. My position on this is you don't really know exactly what's happening behind closed doors. So that's generally what my take is on that. But you never know. If he can provide evidence on that point, which is not exactly what the speech is for, but if he wanted to provide evidence on that point, certainly there'd be room for it. But for now, it's still just kind of something that I would have said might have been done. It might have been something that could have been done, honestly, like the second day of the war. We all kind of remember that speech. What was it? It was like at 3 a.m. Remarkable. It's like 3 a.m. speech. It was like between a Friday and a Saturday, right? And that was, this has so far been clearer than that from my perspective, at least. So we're a month into this, and if this is a speech really, as he told the Daily Wire, to talk about how great he is, then frankly, it might already be too late if the war isn't coming to an end, because public opinion has just trended in the wrong direction. And maybe this is the type of, this is the type of attempt to get some of that back, to turn things around. Certainly possible. But let's see if we can find another way to get the screen in here, or to get the speech in here. Looking like we might have another way to do it. But this is an interesting point, that when you have public opinion trending in the wrong direction, and by the way, what I'm trying to do right now is pull up the feed and cover the speech at the same time. This is a skill that you have to have in the new media landscape of live streaming, as a small team. I'm thinking I have a little back way to do it. We'll see if I make it happen. But we're a month into the war, and people recognize, obviously, the frustration, and Trump recognizes the frustration. So if you can't get out of the war, is there a way to change public opinion? I think that's a genuinely good question. We will see on that front. Let's see if my little workaround might help us out on this end. Let's see what we can do here. All right. Interesting. All right, no good so far, sadly. Fun times. But again, we're not looking at a hugely newsy speech so far. So far, it's looking like it's Trump's attempt to stanch the flow. Let me put this up on the screen here. This is going to be polling. And this is just to get a little bit of a sense of what the president is responding to. At this point, it should be right there. Okay, so you can see, if we go on the Real Clear Politics website over to Trump's approval rating, and kind of follow the trend lines along over the last month. I love how they have these tables here. So what you're looking at in red is the disapproval. So let's scroll over here as we wait to see if this makes any news. This is February 28th. So that's the day of the first strike. And February 28th, what you see is Trump running an 11.4 point deficit, disapproval to approval. And that means the country was at about a 55% disapproval rate and about a 44% approval rate. Now, over the course, most of the news has been squarely focused on Iran over the course of the last month. And now he's up to a negative 15.6% gap here in approve to disapprove. So his disapproval has climbed. It's only 2 points, which may not seem utterly disastrous, from that February 28th number of 54.6. He's now at 56.7, and the approval rating's at 41.1. So what we're seeing is 2 to 3 points in either direction. But that's a trend line that there's very little reversal of the trend, obviously, so far. And so if it's going in the wrong direction, you're a month in, you want to stanch the flow of the bleeding. So one thing he's also said in the speech so far is that his first preference was diplomacy. That's something else we were literally just talking about. Was he going to try and pitch to the country that he was just out of options, that he doesn't want to start new wars. But a nuclear Iran, which has been going after the United States for years and years, gave him absolutely no choice, left him with absolutely no choice. So far, that seems like it's the argument he's trying to make. Right now, the speech has been building the case. And again, I think if you're doing that a month into the war, it suggests that you're trying to recover the trust of the public and the support of the public as you've lost double-digit numbers of servicemen, injuries over 200 so far, serious injuries also in the double digits, and servicemen and women, I should say. So if we don't get any big news tonight, and so far that's what it's looking like, we don't know how long he's going to go. There was speculation that this would be about a ground troop announcement. There was some speculation that this might be about NATO in particular. It might be, okay, are we withdrawing from NATO? Are we setting terms for a NATO withdrawal? And Trump is a showman, so maybe he's trying to hook everyone 15 minutes in. Or maybe, and this is what it looks like so far, he's trying to make the case for the war on his own terms because he sees the polling. He's in a midterm year. He's uncomfortable with the direction that it's going in. And what he wanted to do was have his team put out the best possible argument for what's happened over the course of the last month. Even just right now, we're hearing that the president said pain at the gas station is going to be, quote, short term. So trying to set expectations as candidates go out and campaign in primary elections and general elections starting in some places already, but to start in earnest soon. Because, again, that's what my big takeaway is from this so far. We're nearly 20 minutes into the address, and what he's saying is not any major announcement. I think if he was going to announce ground troops, he might flirt with a threat of ground troops to keep everybody on their toes. If he was going to announce ground troops, a NATO withdrawal, I could be proven wrong literally in 30 seconds, but I think if he was going to do that, he already would have done that. And what we're seeing from the speech is he's done this a couple of times. Everyone expects some big news. And what we see actually is Trump's attempt to more boldly and robustly represent his argument in the best possible terms, where you have a team of speechwriters putting this together perfectly. He has the visuals perfect, and that's what he wants to inject into the bloodstream of the media coverage. So to me, as I'm looking at the news coming in so far, the lack of news coming in so far, that's what this is looking like. It looks like a clever move from Trump to try to reset the conversation on the war a month in, as all of the trend lines have gone in the wrong direction for him. Now he's thanking allies in the Middle East who are suffering losses. Obviously, the IRGC announced just yesterday that major defense contractors, and there are major companies people don't even think of as defense contractors. You think of Palantir, like, oh, that's a defense contractor. You think of JP Morgan, like, oh, it's a major company, but JP Morgan was on the IRGC's list. And if you look across the Gulf states, they're fanned out. These major American companies have buildings, have headquarters, have locations all across the Gulf states that are certainly vulnerable. Amazon was hit in Bahrain this morning. And so Trump thanking allies in the Middle East who are feeling the squeeze intensely right now, that's significant. Not huge news. Again, so far we are now about 20 minutes into the speech, and Trump is doing exactly what he told the room at the White House earlier today he would, which was talk about how great he is. And I mean that in the sense he's not breaking news. He's making the affirmative case for the war on his own terms. And so that's what we're looking at right now. We will break in with any further big news that we get from this. I think now that we're about 20 minutes in, he's probably not likely to announce ground troops, NATO, or any major military decision. So we'll see what happens on that front, but we're going to bring in Billy Hallowell in just one moment. So excited to get to our conversation with Billy. Stay tuned for us. And by the way, thank you for staying tuned through the live coverage. You know how that can be sometimes. The streams on YouTube are not always reliable at all, and sometimes you end up in that kind of position. It's probably, if you're listening to the podcast, you're probably like, what the heck is going on? But it was fun, right? It was fun. Now, Over the years, I've been clear about this. I'm not just pro-birth, I'm pro-life, and being pro-life means standing with mothers not only before their baby is born, but long after. And that is exactly why I partner very proudly with Preborn. Preborn doesn't just save babies, they make motherhood abundantly possible. They provide free ultrasounds and share the truth of the gospel with women in crisis, and then they stay with real practical help, including financial support, for up to 2 years after the baby is born. This is what true Christ-centered compassion looks like, not just for the baby, but for the mother too. So here's where you can make a difference. Just $28 provides a free life-saving ultrasound, one chance for a mother to see her baby. This is a true statistic. When she does, she's twice as likely to choose life. That is so powerful. Preborn is trying to save 70,000 babies this year. So don't just say you're pro-life, live it. Help save babies and support mothers today. Go to preborn.com/Emily or call 855-601-2229. That's preborn.com/Emily. All right, we're joined now by my friend Billy Hallowell. He is a CBN host and author of a book I recommend all the time. It's right behind me. It's called Playing with Fire. He also has a new documentary out. It's called Investigating the Supernatural, Angels and Demons. Billy, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Billy, you cover American politics. You cover Trump. So the president appears to still be speaking at his address this evening, but actually it looks like it just wrapped. But I wanted to get your take as a student of Trump.
Yeah.
Does it seem like what he was doing was trying to reset the argument, that he saw the trend lines going? I want to just see if maybe, I don't know if I'm wrong on this, but what I got from that speech is that he's a month into the war, basically to the day, and he's trying to reset the conversation on his own terms so that his argument is injected into the bloodstream of the media conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what you have is a war-weary country. We don't want to see war. The public is against it. And he's recognizing that and seeing how complex this is, how fractured, the Republican Party is and conservatives are right now on a lot of these issues, which is a big problem for him on this. Obviously, the country as a whole having those complex feelings. It feels to me like this is sort of damage control. Let's try to get people in, help them understand. And that has nothing to do with whether or not this is the right move, right? There are right moves in politics, and then there are political moves. And so he's trying to navigate that. This is a person who was not a politician the first time, who prided himself on not having any wars start under his tenure. Now we're in a second term, not consecutive terms. And so a lot of time passed in between there where he developed into a politician. This is now a politician, a businessman turned politician who has to make very tough decisions. And I think this is a political move tonight.
It's a good point also that you just made about divisions in his own party, which haven't translated into polling among Republican voters. I mean, Republican voters who identify as MAGA are overwhelmingly behind him. It's obviously a problem for him that independents are flagging. Yes. One quote that he had in the speech, he said, "We are going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong," Billy. So I don't know if we can technically define that as an escalation, but I think he's probably sensitive to his own administration's messaging. I mean, even his biggest supporters know that the earliest days of the war, you kind of had Marco Rubio out there, you had Trump himself out there. Trump himself, as he negotiates, says different things. The war is over. We're going to keep bombing. It's kind of all over the map. So it sort of does make sense then that he wants to prepare the public for an additional short-term pain at the gas pump and to see more bombing in the Middle East, since he said we're going to hit them hard over the next couple weeks.
Yeah, and something you made such a good point there about Republicans, because you don't see it in the polling, but in the overall polling, right? But where you do see it is in the anecdotal conversation about Israel, right? And about these other issues, right? There's these splintering on other issues that haven't necessarily overtaken his ability to really connect with Republicans overall. But there's a danger there because Israel's become such a big dividing point among some conservatives for a lot of different reasons. And really independence, the entire country, right? This has become a dividing point. So I'm going to be very interested to see where that goes and if the intensity of that, if the perception is, and by the way, I actually don't personally think this is accurate, but if the perception is that Israel dragged America into this war, and that's sort of a narrative that we're seeing among some people, this is something Trump was talking about in the you've seen that clip floating around. I mean, Trump's been talking about Iran for years and years and years. He was very vocal back in 2012, 2013, when Saeed Abedini, an American pastor, was taken captive in Iran. He spoke out back then. I interviewed him about it at the time before he was president.
Oh,
so
did you really, Billy?
I did. I did.
You did? Tell us about that. What year was this?
It must have been 2014, actually. I'm trying to think back.
Sure.
Because obviously that whole scenario with Saeed Abedini was a big deal. Obama was president. Trump was very critical of him at the time. And this was around the time where all the birther stuff was going on, all of that. But I was invited to go to Trump Tower, and I went, and I was supposed to sit in on a meeting between Saeed's wife at the time and Trump. And he was going to meet with her. He was obviously speaking out saying Obama's not doing enough to release this American pastor. And I got to Trump Tower on time, but she had already left. And so it was one of the most interesting experiences I ever had, because I ended up going into his office, and just observing him was very fascinating and how he worked. But one of the things that struck me, and I've shared this story now because Saeed Abedini, since being released, has shared that Trump had given his wife a $10,000 check to help her family. But when I was there, that piece of information was shared by Trump. He said, I gave her a check for $10,000, and he asked that I not report on it at the time. And I thought that was really interesting for a number of reasons. Think whatever you want about Trump, but my assumption would be if he wrote a $10,000 check to somebody, you would assume he'd be like, oh, this is great. I'm stupendous. I'm wonderful. I did this nice thing. He did not want that being reported. And I made a decision at the time not to report it because it didn't really have anything to do with the story. And so I respected that. And it wasn't until Saeed came out and said that I then started talking about it. But it showed me a different side of him that was interesting. And I bring that up because he seemed to have, again, people have different opinions on Trump. He seemed to have a real compassion and interest in Christians being mistreated in other parts of the world, right? And that translated over into this kind act that he did for Saeed's family that he didn't want being reported. So anyway, just an interesting little tidbit of information back from that time.
No, that's actually really interesting, because to the point you made about the divide, particularly in conservative media, Trump is, I took from his speech tonight, somewhat sensitive about claims that he flip-flopped and that he said no new wars, while he was also being really hawkish on Iran. And I think a lot of voters that are more independents, probably like you would call them the bro podcaster, which I don't like that label, but the bro, whatever it is, like the brocaster demo, people who are like, they're like Andrew Schultz, or they're like a Tim Dillon or Sean Ryan, like in that type of vein, people who took no new wars as I'm going to exhaust every possible avenue to a resolution that doesn't involve violence. And Trump mentioned that. He said, basically, I was trying to do this peacefully through diplomacy. So it sounds, Billy, like he's actually somewhat sensitive to that criticism and is, again, trying to reset the conversation on his terms. Yeah,
well, and listen, we all hate war. Nobody wants to see war happen. But I do think that we have to have an honest conversation about the fact that we have a country that just slaughtered tens of thousands, purportedly slaughtered tens of thousands of their own people, that you have a country that not only are they slaughtering their own people, they have again and again and again funded terrorism around the globe. They have pledged to wipe Israel off the map, and they've taken steps to try and do that. I mean, October 7th, obviously with ties to Iran there as well. And we've seen this again and again and again. And so I do think there's a real conversation that has to be had, and people will come to different opinions on what they think should happen here. But the idea that this was just some country doing its own thing and we should just let them live and do that's not really what was happening. They were sowing discord and chaos. And part of that has to do with their ideology and what they're trying to do. And I mean, there's so many complex elements to this. It does seem like again and again, they have tried to avoid this but how long are you going to talk about the same country and the same issues and watch horrific events unfold before somebody does something to try and stop that? Now, I don't want to oversimplify it, but I do think that this is something I can't imagine that the Trump that we saw first term, right, that really didn't want new wars would flippantly enter into wars for no reason, right? That doesn't feel like it tracks, regardless of what people think about him, because for all the people who said he was crazy and unhinged and he was very restrained on these issues. So I'm trying to be very fair as I watch this. Now, the fear, of course, is that you end up in a situation like, Iraq or Afghanistan, where at the end of the day, it's worse than it was sometimes before we went in. But I do think this is a little bit of a different situation for a variety of reasons.
And Trump seems to be really intent on making that point. Yeah, and just as we wrap up this conversation, that's my position is not that Israel dragged us into the war. I mean, I think if we didn't have a Likud hawkish leader in Benjamin Netanyahu as an ally right now, the United States would probably, who was supportive of the U.S. going to war, we would probably want to be, there are people in our government that would want to go to war anyway. They have agency. Trump has agency. Right. And he certainly makes his own decisions, Billy. We know that. All right. Well, thanks so much for being nimble on the breaking news. We do want to talk about some big developments, and they go perfectly with your documentary, which folks can go ahead, stream right now. We have a trailer that I want to roll of the documentary, and then I want to get you, Billy, to talk to us a little bit about where people can find it. First of all, though, just a preview of what's to come. The Artemis II launch happened just a couple of hours ago, and that brings with it a broader conversation of scientific development, space exploration, and the like. So let's go ahead first. Take a look at the trailer for Investigating the Supernatural from Billy.
Is there a spiritual war going on around us? Are angels and demons real? Let's investigate.
In all ancient cultures, people believe in a spiritual realm.
And I was struck that all throughout history, the vast majority of cultures not only believed in evil spirits, but believed in possessions.
And every major religion believes in angels.
For most of the world, the question isn't, is there a spiritual world? The question is, which spirit is the most powerful?
But to say you believe in angels, demons, is oftentimes to expose you to ridicule, like you sound like somebody from the Middle Ages.
Many scientists just write it all off, saying this is just people's imaginations, they're hallucinating, they're having dreams, none of this is real.
All right, so you can go stream that on CBN. It is super, super interesting. But as if to prove a point that one of your guests, one of the people you interviewed in that trailer, Billy, said, you expose yourself to ridicule. Well, Vice President JD Vance did an interview with Benny Johnson just a few days ago where he weighed in on this question and invoked the D word, demons. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what Vice President Vance said.
I don't think they're aliens. I think they're demons anyway, but that's a longer discussion.
Well, I can't let you go without a follow-up on that. So you think they're demons?
Well, look, I think that celestial beings who fly around, who do weird things to people, I think that the desire to describe everything celestial, everything as otherworldly, to describe it as aliens, I mean, every great world religion, including Christianity, the one that I believe in, has understood that there are weird things out there, and there are things that are very difficult to explain. And I naturally go, when I hear about sort of extra natural phenomenon, that's where I go to, is the Christian understanding that, there's a lot of good out there, but there's also some evil out there. And I think that one of the devil's great tricks is to convince people he never existed.
Billy, we had a conversation roughly on this topic a couple of weeks ago on the show, and I got a couple of emails being like, people being like, I thought you were, a serious person, and then you had this discussion. And I just would like to invoke Rod Dreher, and other people have made this point as well, that in any other time, if you heard some of these stories about experiences with crafts and the like, people would have said, oh, that's a demon. So tell us what you found as you set out, like Indiana Jones, as you do in these Investigating the Supernatural episodes, documentaries. What did you find?
Yeah. And by the way, if you want to stream it, it's cbn.com/supernatural. You can watch right now. I will tell you, I am very skeptical as a person. I'm a Christian. I've been a Christian my whole life. I've always believed in these things in my mind, but I also struggle often when somebody says they've had these experiences. My first thought is, okay, well, you have to prove that to me, because I'm not going to just believe that you've had some sort of crazy demonic experience. When it comes to the alien topic, I think this is really interesting, because if you had said to either of us probably 5 years ago that we're going to be sitting here talking about aliens and that a sitting vice president would have said that he believes that aliens are demons, we would have laughed probably and said that's not going to happen. But what is happening right now is there's a massive conversation. We'll start with the alien topic. This disclosure push that's been coming. You know, when you make a documentary or a film, you're working a year or two ahead of time. And so when we were planning this, we had to say, okay, we're doing a film on angels and demons, but we do have to address aliens to a degree, and we do in the film, because culture is going to be talking about this. I had no idea. I mean, this film just came out, that we would be releasing it while JD Vance. I mean, I was texting Benny earlier about this, and I was saying, wow, really interesting conversation, you know, with JD on this. But here's the thing. Hugh Ross, Dr. Hugh Ross, who we have in the film, you saw him a little bit in the trailer. He has looked at so many cases, probably more than anybody, of these UFOs, UAPs, they're referred to now, these claims of alien abductions. And it's really interesting because he will say, he's an astrophysicist, he will say that the vast majority of them are explainable by natural phenomena, but there's this residual percentage that are not explainable. And what he has found, and we get into this in the film, it is so interesting. If you have a physical aircraft going through the sky, right, you would have a sonic boom. A sonic boom never exists when it comes to these UFO sightings. It never exists. It is never heard. It is never observed. That is bizarre. It defies science. Now, there's also never a wreckage, right? There's always a crash, but never a wreckage. And so that's interesting as well. Now, of course, that goes to say if you believe these things are actually happening, but there is a disturbance to vegetation. There's some strange things that are often left behind. Now, one of the other things I'll mention, and then I'll get into his theory on this, and it tracks with what JD Vance is saying, actually. The people who claim, and again, it seems laughable, but that they have had experiences with aliens, that they've had a close encounter of the third kind, that's referred to in that way. Those people, their experience is remarkably similar to what people who claim to have had an experience with a demon. It's the same exact thing. They're never positive experiences. They're very similar hallmarks of what happens to those people. They're disturbed mentally sometimes afterward. Now, some would argue, well, they were disturbed beforehand and they're conjuring the whole thing up. You can make that argument, but there seems to be something happening here, and people like Hugh Ross are observing it. And by the way, secular culture is observing it, because guess what? Everybody's talking about this, and the majority of the country now believes in UFOs and aliens. So we have to have a conversation of what are people actually encountering or seeing. And so what Hugh would say is that this is actually a spiritual manifestation. It's demonic. It is not a physical one. So he does not believe that aliens...
And he's an astrophysicist, by the way, just to reemphasize. He's an astrophysicist.
He is. And I just actually caught up with him again this week on CBN, and we were talking about this, and he said he really thought that science would move away from the alien theory. He said, I thought that scientists, as they discovered more, would move away from it. But what's happening is science is moving closer to it. There are scientists who are saying, no, we believe that aliens exist. We believe there could be life on other planets. Again, that is not his position. His position is there's no evidence for that. The evidence points to something spiritual, interdimensional happening. And again, this sounds like crazy science fiction, but we have to have an answer for it. And it's an interesting conversation at the very least.
Well, yeah, and actually just hours ago, the Artemis II launch went off successfully down in Florida. They're on a 10-day trip circling the moon. The Trump administration is really excited about this because they see it as a kind of golden age marker that harkens back to mid-century American greatness and is, moving us in the right direction compared to the rest of the world, that we're able to make some massive, massive steps towards space exploration. Obviously, the president is now close once again with Elon Musk. He is surrounded by a lot of powerful people in the world of tech who are accelerationists and have some sort of wacky science fiction style ideas that are getting increasingly less wacky by the day, we should mention, when it comes to how we can colonize the moon, to talk about Elon for just one moment. But it struck me that one of the men aboard Artemis II, Victor Glover, was quoted saying, "We need Jesus. whether on Earth or circling the moon. And Billy, I listened to a premiere Unbelievable episode, I wish I remembered which one it was, but it was a survey of all of the people who are at the tippy top of their field in these highly advanced scientific niches. Astrophysics, a great example of that. Here's an astronaut, somebody who is one of the smartest people in the world, one of likely the most intelligent people to ever have lived. And here he is, invoking his faith. I have to imagine that's an experience you've had as you've set out to investigate the phenomenon.
Yeah, and I love that you're asking that, because one of the things we've gotten a lot of questions on this series, Investigating the Supernatural, it's a 3-part film series that we started in 2023. The first film that you had me on to talk about last year, it was called Miracles. This one's Investigating the Supernatural, Angels and Demons. And then next year we'll do Heaven and Hell. We're not just taking all these stories and believing them at face value. We're bringing in people like Hugh Ross. We have, and this was really interesting, psychologists, psychotherapists, people who, when you're dealing with the angels and demons topic, have been brought in to do a fair assessment of people to see, is this person mentally ill, or are they dealing with something that can't be explained? And we went to great lengths because I'm skeptical of this. And so I was the one traveling around. Jared Anderson, our director and our writer, he also is super diligent. I mean, we spent a lot of time looking at these stories and then finding experts to speak into them. And what you will find, Dr. Richard Gallagher, for instance, he is a psychiatrist who teaches at Columbia University. He's Ivy League educated. He is one of the smartest guys around. He was brought in by the Catholic Church about 30 years ago to basically be that person who says, hey, are you experiencing mental health issues, or is there something else going on? He was a skeptic who did not believe, and he told the Catholic Church, I'm the wrong person to do this when they came to him. And they actually said, no, you're the right person to do this, because we want somebody who's skeptical. And when he started investigating these cases of, possession or spiritual affliction, he very quickly became a believer, because he was finding things that were inexplicable. You could not explain them by natural phenomena. So I think what you're seeing when you have an astronaut like that who is stepping forward and saying, we need Jesus, and you're seeing all these scientists, they're seeing the complexity of the universe and the world in which we live, and they're recognizing that all of this had to have originated, all this order couldn't have come from disorder or chaos. It had to come from somewhere. At the very least, that's the baseline. And so we're in this really interesting era right now where I think people are looking for answers to life questions. And a lot of these supernatural topics that seemed so outlandish and crazy, when you have evidence that these things have happened and you can pull that together, it becomes almost this apologetic tool that brings people into faith because of that.
Yeah, I feel like that's happening all around us. And before we take a break, I actually wanted to bring up this article in The Atlantic that published just today ahead of Easter Holy Week. Great timing for the article to pop, that's trying to figure out what's happening, where you see this anecdotal evidence of revival, whether it's at Asbury or Latin Mass parishes in New York City. It's not showing up in the polling, but there's some nuance in it. So in The Atlantic, the article says, over roughly the past 2 decades, Pew has conducted its religious landscape study, a large-scale survey about religious beliefs and practices in the U.S. In 2007, 78% of U.S. adults identified as Christians. By 2023, 62% did, a drop driven largely by younger generations. 44% of respondents born in the 1990s, a mix of millennials and Gen Zers, identified as religiously unaffiliated, compared with 29% of respondents from all generations. But the decline began to slow around 2019. The percentage of adults who identified as Christian stabilized a bit above 60%. The nuns have held steady at around 30%. And Gallup found something similar. Political scientist Ryan Burge even found, quote, that the nuns had decreased slightly. Finally, just want to add, The Atlantic goes on to say, to treat the stabilization as a revival overlooks that younger Americans are the least religious age group by many metrics. Members of Gen Z are less likely than people in other generations to profess belief in God, without doubts. Gen Zers are also the least likely to attend religious services regularly and the most likely to never attend them. Many weren't brought up religious. Only 28% of adults born in the 2000s to highly religious families remain highly religious. And despite the claim that Gen Z men are leading a resurgence in traditional Christianity, they are in fact simply leaving the church at a slower rate than women are. But The article interviews people like Bailey Burke, who is a coordinator for the St. Mary Student Parish up in Ann Arbor, and said that there is greater interest in devotional life among the students she works with. Billy, I know that you've seen a lot of this and you've read about this in addition to doing reporting on it yourself. The Atlantic article had an interesting quote about how students may not be, this was from a Catholic, they might not be Catholic, but they are turning to the priests for answers. They're asking the priest to tell them more about Christianity. And that gets to exactly what you're just saying. There's a curiosity that does seem peaked post-COVID.
Yeah. And, you know, I think this is interesting too, because the numbers were, and these are important stats to look at, right? When it comes to, I mean, younger generations are always less likely to believe and go to church and all that. The issue that we've had in recent years has been that millennials and Gen Z were even more less likely, but there has been a shift. And, you know, one of the things, we have to be careful with anecdotals, but after Charlie Kirk's assassination, the weekend after, I was talking to Mike Signorelli, a pastor in New York City, and he was telling me he had 500 people come to faith that Sunday at his church. That never happens. There are so many anecdotals that it creates a pattern that is undeniable, that there is a shift. And here's what I actually think is happening. You have a situation where people have been lied to for so long, young people, and it started with millennials, and now it's gotten even worse for Gen Z, lied to, told that moral relativism is the answer, that they can believe and do whatever they want, that will lead to a path of wonderful life and they'll be happy, and they've realized that's a total lie. They're the first generation to really grow up with that and smartphones and all of that. And now they're really searching and they're looking and they're open. And so we can unpack that more, but there's a lot going on. And I think there are actually better numbers to look at than, oh, I call myself a Christian or not.
Yeah, that's super, super interesting, Billy, and I think very, very helpful. Before we go to break, one more thing I wanted to get your take on. So the Daily Mail had a new article. Again, this was like just within the last 24 hours. The headline here is Mystery of Scientists Dead or Missing rises to 8 as 2 more men tied to America's most coveted secrets joined the list. Now, one of these is a suspicious death that the Daily Mail, it happened, I believe it was last year. It's a disappearance from 2024 and a death from 2025, or I have it the other way around. Either way, they're not happening literally right now, but both sort of suspicious. And when you start putting all 8 of these cases together, the McCaslin case, the Neil McCaslin case, the one that's gotten the most attention, these are people who have worked on some of the highest levels of what's the right way to put it? They would have had the highest levels of access to information about what our government knows and is working on or is trying to find out about extraterrestrial activities. Is there anything to this, Billy? Is it just fodder? Is it too soon to say? What's going on?
You know, it's so interesting because I am one of those people who's like, oh, there are no conspiracies. Or traditionally, I've been that person. There are no conspiracies, but the last 7 years have made me much more likely to say, I don't know. And I think, though, what's important to understand about this, what we're talking about here, is that these things could very well be disconnected, not connected at all. But it does feel like you have to consider foreign influence, foreign actors who want to find out information about what America's doing, our technology, all of our emerging technology. These are people who, outside of just the, UFO and extraterrestrial life issue, these are people who know about our technology. And so there's a real, thirst, I would assume, among our enemies to get to those people to find out that information. When people are disappearing, an eyebrow, or mysteriously dying, an eyebrow should always raise. And when you have up to 8 people, I believe it is here, who are either missing or who have died, and we don't have a real explanation of what's going on, I think at the very least, we should be looking at that to understand, is there a pattern in what is happening here? And look, I think sometimes silence is unhelpful. When there's silence and nobody's speaking out, everyone's wondering, well, what are they hiding? And they may very well be hiding nothing. But it is, at the very least, it's a head scratcher and it's a little strange. And again, 10 years ago, I would have been like, oh, there's nothing to see here. Now I'm kind of like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. And these are people who have a lot of important information. So if I'm in that camp of other people like them who fortunately haven't had the same issues they've had, I'd be concerned and worried probably if I were one of those people at this point.
Yeah. Well, Billy, I'm going to take a quick break and want to come back and have more questions for you in just one moment. First, this spring, if you want real results, so better gut health, glowing skin, stronger hair, and steady energy, start with colostrum. When your gut is balanced, everything else improves. And today's sponsor, Cowboy Colostrum, offers premium bovine colostrum sourced entirely from American grass-fed cows and made in the USA. Unlike many brands, it uses true first-day whole colostrum, which is packed with bioactives like immunoglobulins and growth factors. Don't worry, only surplus colostrum is collected after calves are fully nourished. Also, note how seamlessly I pronounced immunoglobulins. Of course, I butchered on the second one. Now, Cowboy Colostrum is unprocessed, full fat, and protein rich for maximum nutrient density. Supporting your gut can boost immunity, reduce bloating, and improve skin, hair, nails, and energy levels. Results that you can actually see and feel. It's also easy to enjoy with natural flavors like chocolate, Madagascar vanilla, matcha, and strawberry made from real ingredients. I like the strawberry. You just have to add a scoop to your coffee or smoothie and feel the difference all day long. So for a limited time, our listeners get up to 25% off their entire order. What a deal. Just head to www.cowboycolostrum.com/afterparty and use code afterparty at checkout. That's 25% off when you use code Emily at cowboycolostrum.com/afterparty. We're back now with more from Billy Hallowell. He is a CBN host and author. He has a new documentary out. It is called Investigating the Supernatural, Angels and Demons. You can stream it at CBN. It's a really great piece of journalism for Holy Week in particular, as folks may be considering some of these foundational existential questions more sharply than normal. Billy, I wanted to get your reaction because this is about angels and demons, and there's been so much conversation in the last few months, actually really the last like 5+ years, about whether America at its upper echelons is being influenced by demonic forces. I think, as Christians, we probably believe that just about every society is being influenced by demonic forces, especially people who are rich and powerful, because we know those two conditions can be kryptonite for people who are following Jesus. And it's human nature in general. I saw this interview today with Jen Shah, who you probably don't know who she is, Billy, but she's a Real Housewife of Salt Lake City.
I know who she is. I know who she is. Believe it or not, I do. From Utah. From Utah. Listen, my wife watches all these things, so I know. She's seen these things.
God bless your wife. Well, Jen Shah did a huge half-hour interview with People magazine. She's just been released from prison, and is trying to take accountability. She was basically involved in a conspiracy. The legal conspiracy was over fraud, whether she was defrauding elderly people in scams, and she was in prison. She was actually in prison with Ghislaine Maxwell,
another high-profile
which is
prisoner.
rather interesting. And in her interview with People magazine, she dished a little bit and said something slightly interesting.
Was Ghislaine Maxwell?
Let's
Did
listen.
you have any interactions with?
Okay, once again, not working. Basically, she's asked Billy if she had any interactions with Ghislaine Maxwell, and Jen Shah said she made it clear that she had no remorse. While she was watching, for example, victims on the screen, she was dismissive of them. This is what Jen Shah goes on to say in this conversation with People magazine. Candace Cameron Bure had a very interesting, this was March 10th, did a very interesting little, I don't know if it's okay to call it a tangent, but she talked about an experience she had in Hollywood that led to something.
It's a hard one to explain because I know the story. Yeah, it's
good.
Basically, it was a party that she was going to that a friend invited she and her husband to, and it was sort of like an S&M. It was basically a sex party. I mean, that's what it was. When she got there, she was horrified by what she saw.
Yeah. And we have the clip. Let's go ahead and roll it.
Yeah, I went to a party once with Val because we were married, and it ended up being this underground party that was an S&M like sex thing that was so dark and demonic. And we walked in and my eyeballs were popping out of my head because I saw stuff I've never seen before in my life. And I'm looking at Val going like, how are we here? What is happening? And the one person that invited us, but we made a hard U-turn and walked right out of there. And it just was like so slimy and weird. And I was like, we're going to pause before we ever say yes to going out with that friend again. We just had no idea what we were walking into, and it was so disgusting and gross.
But you know what's interesting to me about that, Billy, and you may know more because I think you probably know Candace, but it's so casual. I mean, the stories are so casual. Like, oh, someone just invites someone else because they're another Hollywood figure, and they're kind of used to this type of activity. One of the things that jumps out from the Epstein files is how many people were at this man's house and continued to go back to his house. And I think nobody even pauses to remember, or few people do, what the pictures of his Manhattan townhouse where they were gathering show. The same thing with Little St. James. I mean, they are riddled with deeply bizarre art. This is something that was revealed in Washington, D.C. With the Heather and Tony Podesta art collection. Now, that took some really unfortunate mutations in conspiracy land, but really disturbing, disgusting, repulsive art that people were mingling at just at normal, like, happy hour events, book parties in Washington, D.C. That's what jumps out to me from Epstein files and that Buret story.
Yeah, and Candace is a good friend, actually. And I will tell you, talk about reading the room wrong. She's not a person you would ever invite to something like that. I mean, who's going to those things? But like, I love her. She's great. But I think, to your point, this darkness that sort of lurks in these places of power, right? In Hollywood, media, these sort of upper echelons of power, politicians. And this is what breeds conspiracy theories, right? But then you start to see these things and you're like, wow, these things are really going on. And one thing for me that I have tried to do the last 5 years is pull myself back and really look. I've been a Christian my whole life, right? I've read Ephesians 6 1,000 times. And if you're not a Christian, you're watching this and you're like, what is Ephesians 6? It's where the Apostle Paul talks about this dynamic of human existence in which we are in a spiritual battle. And it's actually interesting because we have become, I think, in America, especially the last decade, consumed with fighting with each other. It's Democrats versus Republicans. It's me versus you. It's we hate those people hate us. We're going to cancel everybody. And yet what Ephesians 6 says is that we're actually in a spiritual battle. It's not a battle between flesh and blood, but we are distracted and convinced that it is. And what's actually happening behind the scenes, and this will sound strange to somebody who doesn't have spiritual lenses, right? They're not looking at the world that way. But what's happening behind the scenes is this battle between good and evil that is actually pouring over into our world. And a lot of the events, this is why you turn on your TV or you watch this show and you see what Emily's talking about and you might say, wow, that is so evil what happened in the news today. If you're not a Christian or you're not a person of faith, you have to ask yourself, what does it mean to be evil? Where does that come from? But there's this battle happening and it's affecting not just the political and social strata, but what's happening in our own lives even. And that is something that understanding that better through doing these films has actually helped me understand the world better and deal even with other people with whom I have profoundly different ideals and big differences. How do I treat those people? How do I deal with them in understanding that dynamic?
Before you run, Billy, I want to play this Joe Rogan clip, just since we're on this topic and you have a documentary out literally about angels and demons. I think there are some secular people, to the point you just made, and that we've been talking about this entire conversation, college students asking priests more about the faith. There's this curiosity about what explains why some people have been sucked into just utter depravity and so casually. And here's Joe Rogan on a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience with Robert Malone, who, again, is another brilliant person with impeccable credentials. If you're trying to look at people's credentials, Robert Malone is a very, very, very intelligent, credentialed person talking about Epstein.
When you see in the email, like, clear evidence that they're talking about children.
In pretty obscene ways.
Horrifying ways. Yeah. My position on it is completely shifted. I thought there's probably some really sick people that have an appetite for that, but I hadn't seen any real evidence for it until these files. And now I'm like, oh, this is demonic. This is clearly demonic.
The experiences that we've encountered over the last half a dozen years, it's hard to come up with a language to express what we're observing in the world other than the language of theology.
Well, demonic by action. So whether or not demons exist, if they did exist, that is how they would behave. They would prey on children and torture children.
Wow, that is such an interesting comment, Billy. The last thing that Rogan said there. And I think he has been going to church, which
Yeah.
is great. But I think it's probably also fair to describe him as like a skeptic or somebody who's a seeker or curious. But I'm a little less clear on that. Some of this is about 100%. Like the journalist in me can't say that it's 100% always about children or that 100% of it is about children. So I'm a little less clear on that. But there's some, I mean, just taking some of the art, that Jeffrey Epstein having all these copies of Lolita and then doing what he's doing. I mean, it's just obviously some of it is targeted in really obscene, disgusting ways toward what we would probably describe as underage people. So to that last point he made, Billy, is that how a demon would act?
You know, one of the things that struck me both with Playing with Fire, the book that you were talking about, when I first started looking at evil, you know, almost a decade ago now, and then in this documentary was that, you know, the hallmarks of Satan, right? What does the devil do? What is his goal? And what would demons be? What would the goal of the demons be? And the Bible is really clear. Satan comes to kill, steal, destroy, and confuse. And when you look at our culture, a lot of those attributes we see in the culture, in the issues that we address, in even the life issue. And you go down the line, you see those hallmarks. And so absolutely that is what you would see. And you also can look at the biblical narratives, you know, even for skeptics, if you want to understand the Christian mindset, when people are possessed, how they're behaving and acting in scripture is beyond anything that you can imagine. They're horrific stories. And actually in Investigating the Supernatural, Angels and Demons, we present modern day stories that reflect that, and they have compelling evidence. But the point is, yes, I think that what he said there at the end, Malone, about, you know, that the language of theology is really the only way to explain what we're watching happen right now. I actually just, you know, as we round out here, I think this is important to note. I'm 42 years old. Never before in my lifetime have I seen that Ephesians 6 dynamic where you have glimmers of revival unfolding at the same time as some of the most horrific things. You're watching this battle between good and evil unfold in the news, in our politics, globally, in our own lives, even at a level that we have not experienced before. And that dynamic should not be lost on us. I don't know what it means. I don't know where we are in the timeline of things, but what I do know is that language of theology, that was such a beautiful way to put this, because in order to understand what is happening, I don't think we can have a proper understanding of any of the events that are happening around us without seeing it through that Ephesians 6 lens. And that's just where I've arrived at this. And that is not me saying, oh, I'm a Christian, and that's why. That is where the evidence has led me as I've been exploring these things and looking at them.
Little spooky fun fact, Billy. I've been reading my Bible chronologically. I'm on Ephesians 6 right now.
Oh, wow.
It's like one page in my giant Bible, but obviously that is for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God. Billy, where can people watch Investigating the Supernatural, Angels and Demons if their appetite has been whetted by this?
Yeah, cbn.com/supernatural. And when you're done with that, if you want to go back and look at our Miracles film, it's cbn.com/miracles. You can watch both of them. But yeah, check it out. And I want to hear from people. I want you to push back if you don't agree. I want to hear your stories if you have them. Reach out to us. We want to hear it all.
Yeah, worth going back and watch the Miracles ones too if you haven't. Great stuff on NDEs. So Billy Hallowell, absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, all right. When we come back, Don Lemon, obviously, why not? First, though, a fresh start is possible. Debt can feel like it's getting worse every month, but that only continues if nothing changes. PDS Debt has already helped hundreds of thousands of people rewrite their financial story and take back control, and your turn can start right now. So if you're struggling with credit cards, personal loans, or medical bills, PDS Debt creates personalized options to help you get out of debt. They look beyond the numbers to understand your situation and build a plan that's designed specifically for you. There's no minimum credit score, and their entire mission is to help you save more, pay off debt faster, and finally put money back where it belongs, in your pocket. They're A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, have thousands of 5-star Google reviews, and hold a 5-star rating on Trustpilot because their approach works. And the longer you wait, the more interest and fees pile up. We all know the best time to start was yesterday. The next best time is right now. If I had needed this product, it is what I would use. Don't wait another month. Change your story in 30 seconds. Get your free personalized assessment and the best option for you at pdsdebt.com/Emily. That's pdsdebt.com/Emily. Again, pdsdebt.com/Emily. All right, we're going to round it off with Don Lemon, who in a conversation recently with Alex Wagner said some of the funniest shit he has ever said. And that is a very high bar for Don Lemon to clear at this stage of his life. Without further ado, I say, let's just roll it. Let's hear what Don Lemon thinks his future could hold. Maybe president, maybe the head of a major media company. Either way, it's bright because his capacity for greatness knows no bounds, lest you think otherwise. Here's Don.
I know people are going to think I'm crazy. This is going to be the headline, and people are going to laugh about it. I think I could be president of the United States. I could definitely run this country better than Donald Trump.
Paper towel roll could, but yes,
yeah,
you would be a market improvement.
As an independent, though, there would be a hard time for me to run for anything because
sorbet.
The way the system is set up, I'd have to choose a side. And so, I probably would have to become a Democrat. Am I at that point now? No. And I know people are going to say Don Lemon was crazy, but yeah, look. Why can't I think about running for office? Why can't I think about being president of the United States when? Did anybody think Barack Obama, as he says, this guy with a funny name, is from a mixed background? Did anybody ever think that he would become president? You know what else I think that I could run better than most people?
Obama.
A news organization, because I was there. I've been in the game for so long, and I'm not interested in being, the anchor out front. I could come in and fix the bulk of their problems and lickety split in no time flat.
Alex Wagner was literally like, what the? His head before he was live streaming the storming of a church, his head was already the size of Saturn. What has happened since, where he was the subject of news over and over again because the big story for like a month was Operation Metro Surge in Minneapolis. Given the chaos that was unfolding up there, Don Lemon became like the face of the resistance to Operation Metro Surge for weeks. And that brought him tons of subscribers. And listen, I hope you are all okay. If you're subscribed to Don Lemon, if you subscribed after what he did in Minneapolis because you found him to be someone who is at the cutting edge, had his finger on the pulse of American journalism and the anti-Trump resistance, maybe you're getting exactly what you're looking for. But if you're really looking for hard-hitting investigative reporting, there are other places I would suggest you might be able to find it that aren't Don Lemon's channel. But you always heard him talking about like the lemon heads. I probably listen to more Don Lemon than most people, but you would always hear him talking about the lemon heads, which is like the 5 people who are his most hardcore subscribers who like buy his merch. Maybe, I don't even know if they buy his merch, and chat with him every single day on his streams and the like. He was already doing that before, but then he became a resistance hero and people subscribed to as part of the anti-Trump resistance. And what has happened to an already megalomaniacal Don Lemon is, I can't be sad about it because it's so damn funny. First of all, you can hate Donald Trump bitterly, deeply. You can have a De Niro level hatred of Donald Trump. You still have to say Don Lemon's resume includes working as a journalist for years. Donald Trump's involved business, like actually like big business deals. I'm not saying anything about the nature or the quality of those business deals. I'm saying the man was globetrotting, making, high worth deals, high pressure deals. And again, not saying whether they were great deals, bad deals. We're not even going to get into that. The idea that Don Lemon, who has basically for the last 10 years of his life just been doing pure commentary, I can say that because I almost do purely commentary. There's no part of me that would ever want the reins of the United States of America, of the presidency of the United States of America, nor would I think I would be qualified to do it, nor would I ever threaten to inflict that on all of you good people. But Don Lemon not only thinks he would be better than Donald Trump, he just thinks he would be a good president. He also thinks that he would be great at turning a major media company around. That's fascinating to me because we've been critical, obviously, though I am nothing but impressed with the way the free press has built up as a business. With the way that the Barry Weiss Free Press CBS News merger has gone. We've been critical on that on this show since basically day one. Don Lemon has a I'm trying to think how mean to be here. An utterly mediocre YouTube channel that only has numbers right now because he found himself in the middle of a firestorm because he decided to fly up to Minneapolis. I'll give him that. It was smart, but it was the big story in the news for a week, so not that smart. Put on his parka, get a little influencer microphone, suck up to some libs who were about to storm a church, let them bring him in on the plan, bring him into the church, and has ever since become a resistance hero and a MAGA foe. That's all it took for Don Lemon. There was no grand strategy about it. And yet he's like 2 months into this like new success on YouTube. His channel was not successful before that. His independent media career, I think, listen, I don't know what his internal numbers were like. I think it would be crazy to describe it as successful beforehand. If you're describing success by influence, there was minimal influence on the discourse overall. But my other favorite part of that clip with Alex Wagner is he was like, I would probably have to register as a Democrat. If you put a gun to my head, I guess I would have to register as a Democrat. But for Don, it would really be between like Democrat and progressive, right? Like his problem with Democrats is probably that they weren't angry enough about ICE, which is funny because he was also doing the pull your pants up commentary circa like 2014 around the Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown era of the sort of racial discourse in America. The guy doesn't believe in anything but himself, and that's never been more obvious. But if he thinks that he right now, because he's had 2 months of a surge on his channel, that he could be a great president and turn around a media network, a media company, I hope we get to see it. Frankly, I hope we get to see it. I hope somebody says, you know what? This man is onto something. Don Lemon has like 1 million subscribers now. I should check. I don't know how many Lemon heads are actually out there, but you know, he's at 1.27 million subscribers. He's Don, you're blowing me out of the water, and big ups to you. I think you should absolutely take the reins of a major media company, and we'll all see what happens. I look forward to buying a subscription, and I look forward to covering your run for president, of course. All right, I'm going to stop it there tonight. You guys, I covered Don Lemon so much, I can't help it. But Emily@EvelynMcCareMedia.com is where you can send me an email. I love to answer those on our weekly edition of the show called Happy Hour. That's only on podcast feeds, so make sure you subscribe on Apple or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. We will be back here on Friday with that audio-only show, and then Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern, back here live on the channel, so please do subscribe so you never miss it. We'll see you soon.